Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Geraghty of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, so glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. As we mentioned yesterday, Jim Geraghty is away for the next couple of days, and we're thrilled to have in his place today Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, contributing editor, National Review Online, Fox News contributor, and the author of several excellent books, including Ball of Collusion. Andy, great to have you back.
Greg, great to be here. I didn't realize that was you playing the piano in the bar one day. That's great.
You don't want to see my real musical skills. My my musical talent maxed out with the alto sax in the 8th grade, so it's a little rusty.
You got further than I did, if it makes you feel any better.
All right. Well, let's talk about a number of legal things percolating here, as we like to do when you're here, and pick your brain and get your expertise on these things, one of which we've talked about a number of times, and that's the prosecution turned conviction turned sentencing for Donald Trump on those 34 counts. And Lower Manhattan, you were with us several times during those proceedings. You were on Fox News, I think, every day, explaining how insane this prosecution was and the twisting of the law that got to that point where Trump was being prosecuted on felonies. But now, of course, that he's won the presidency and he's going to be the 47th president, things are changing. There was supposed to be sentencing for Trump in September. That got kicked back till this month. And now Merchan is punting again. But it looks like we are going to get a decision here, at least a 4-year decision, pretty much along the lines of what you were suggesting last week. This is going to be paused until Trump is out of office. CBS News with the story says lawyers for Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg wrote a letter to Justice Juan Merchan that Trump should not be sentenced for his crimes until after he completes his second term in office. That would be the year 2029, more than a decade after the investigation into Trump's cover-up of a hush money payment began. The quote is, "Consideration must be given to various non-dismissal options that may address any concerns raised by the pendency of a post-trial criminal proceeding during the presidency, such as deferral of all remaining criminal proceedings until after the end of the defendant's upcoming presidential term." So Merchan hasn't ruled on this yet, but once the prosecution is asking for this, I assume there's usually deference given, Andy. So when do you think we're going to get a final word on this, or at least for the next few years? And do you expect him to go along with the prosecutor's recommendation?
I don't really see that there's any alternative to doing that. Here's the problem. Trump has a pending motion to vacate the 34 verdicts of guilty that the jury found during the trial in late May. And that's largely based on the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, which happened about a month after the trial. So immunity complicates things because unlike other issues that come up in a criminal trial, other claims of error that a defendant makes, immunity is instantly appealable. Like if you make a complaint as a defendant that my confession shouldn't have been admitted, or this evidence should have been suppressed, or that witness shouldn't have been asked those questions, if you think that prejudiced your trial, what the law makes you do is you store all that up until the end. If the jury acquits you, there's no appeal. So usually in the law, you have to get convicted by the jury or get found guilty by the jury, and then 3 months later or so, the judge imposes sentence, formally enters the judgment of conviction, and then the whole case goes up on appeal, every error you want to raise. Immunity is different. The only other one I can think of off the top of my head that's like it is double jeopardy, in the sense that the claim or the constitutional offense is not just being convicted wrongly, it's being tried in the first place. In other words, you have immunity. They're not supposed to be able to haul you into court. So that being the case, you're allowed what's known as interlocutory appeal, which means as soon as the lower court makes a ruling on immunity, you get to go to the Court of Appeals and appeal that, even if it's before the trial and even if it's before some stage of the trial, like sentencing. So the issue here is that, assuming, as I do, that Judge Merchan was going to deny Trump's post-trial motion. Trump was going to run immediately to the New York Courts of Appeals, and potentially there's 2 layers of appeal in New York, and then he could go to the U.S. Supreme Court because this is a constitutional issue. So before Merchan would have been able to impose sentence, Trump would have been appealing on the basis of immunity, and that sentencing would never have taken place. Now, the only way that I could see the case getting resolved without all that happening would be if Bragg agreed with Trump that his guilty verdicts needed to be vacated because Bragg shouldn't have put in immunized evidence of presidential acts during the trial. Bragg is not going to agree to that. You know, Bragg is willing, I think it's become obvious, to delay this so that Trump can pursue whatever appeals he wants to pursue, but he's not going to give up the conviction. He feels like he won the trial, so he's not giving up the guilty verdicts. So here's Trump's dilemma. His best way of getting this case reversed is getting to appeal, because there's a million things that were wrong with this trial. Like put immunity to the side. There's about 10 other errors here that could result in this case being reversed. But the thing is, he can't get to appeal on everything else unless the judge first sentences him and enters onto the record a formal judgment of conviction. And I think Trump doesn't want to be a convicted felon as president. So to my mind, I think, and I believe Bragg thinks this as well, that Trump would be content to see this whole thing frozen before sentencing and before the entry of a judgment of conviction, with the idea that I tried to explain yesterday to someone, Greg, that I'm an analyst. Most of us who do this kind of thing are analysts. Trump is not an analyst. He's a fatalist. What an analyst does is look at the various alternatives and try to figure out what's the best one or the least bad one under the circumstances. That's not how Trump operates. What Trump does is whatever disaster he needs to evade today, he evades today, and he worries about tomorrow. He doesn't do this cost-benefit thing. He tries to put everything off forever on the idea that eventually it'll swing his way. This is a 78-year-old guy who's been elected president twice, and he's a billionaire. So it's worked out pretty well for him, even if it's not the way you or I would be comfortable living. So I think what Trump is thinking is, look, I get this delayed. I'm just going to tell the public the whole thing was BS. I'm not a convicted felon because the judgment hasn't been entered. I haven't been sentenced. I'm going to tell them that delay is victory, which he already started to do this week. And who knows? 4 years, a lot of things can happen. Plus, if you get to the end of the rainbow at the end of 4 years, he's going to be an 83-year-old, twice elected American president, hopefully coming off a good term. I mean, we'll have to see. But what district attorney is going to be interested in picking up that case and running with it in 2029? I think Trump's making a good bet that probably if he can get this delayed for 4 years, he'll never really have to think much about it again.
Well, I think that's right. You don't know if Alvin Bragg's going to even still have the job 4 years from now. I think he's up again next year. And my guess is, at least my hope is, there's going to be a vigorous primary there. He certainly deserves one. And then, as many people have suspected, this was all about kneecapping Trump in his effort to win back the White House. And then once he's won it back and he's out of the office, he's, again, 82, 83 years old. Do you still throw the book at him if this case is still even in existence then? So
I'm glad you raised the point about Bragg being up for re-election next year. There's a lot of commentary out there from the Trump camp saying, look, lawfare was a disaster for Democrats nationally. It probably cost them the election. What's wrong with Bragg? Why doesn't he just surrender like Jack Smith did and like it looks like Fani Willis's case is going to collapse? Why doesn't Bragg surrender? Two things. One, Bragg already won the case. Unlike the other cases that got started, Bragg feels like he won the jury trial. So he doesn't want to give that up. But the other thing is, it's a mistake to look at Democrats as if they were a monolith. Manhattan Democrats are not the same as national Democrats. So while Democrats may think that lawfare cost them and that it was in the end it was a very bad strategy, it's a good strategy for Bragg, who I would remind people is an elected Democrat. Kamala Harris beat Trump in Manhattan by 65 points. Bragg ran for election promising he was going to use the office against Trump, and he got elected. 3 days ago, the New York Post reported that, according to the polling in Manhattan, Bragg is a heavy favorite to be reelected next year. So maybe lawfare is bad for Democrats nationally. It ain't bad for Alvin Bragg. At least it hasn't been to this point.
No, I mean, prosecuting Donald Trump was never going to be the death knell of your political career as a Democrat in Manhattan.
Nope.
Constantly letting violent criminals out of jail and letting them repeat on the streets and beating up your family members and neighbors. That would be the thing that I think would put Alvin Bragg's political future in doubt. But it's a very lopsided town. And they, once you have the office as a Democrat, it's hard to get you out of there. So we'll see what happens. And we're going to have a fun mayor's race next year as well. With an indicted mayor and Andrew Cuomo thinking about a comeback. All sorts of just fantastic options for voters in the Big Apple. But I'll tell you about fantastic options. Omaha Steaks. That is the option you want for yourself, for your family, for loved ones. This holiday season, you can't go wrong with the mouth-watering steaks, the burgers, the seafood, the chicken, the wine, sides, desserts. They've been around since 1917. If they survive Woodrow Wilson, they can survive just about anything, and they're the world's #1 delivery butcher. The reviews are fantastic. I've had Omaha Steaks many times. Never had a bad product from Omaha Steak. The steaks are so tender. They're so juicy. Tons of flavor. The burgers are great. They're nice and big portions, and the sides, like the steak cut fries we talked about, so good. And right now, the offer is fantastic. Save 50% site-wide at omahasteaks.com, plus get an extra $30 off with the promo code 3ML and a $30 reward card when you shop early. Once again, visit omahasteaks.com and save 50% off site-wide. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code, the number 3ML, and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code, the number 3ML. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, Andy, on to our second martini for the day, and this one has multiple layers. We've seen multiple times now where the Supreme Court has told states like Arizona and Texas and others, when they're desperately trying to keep the border secure and the Democratic administration won't do it, especially the Biden administration, and the court has to keep telling them, for the most part, no. Immigration law enforcement is the job of the federal government. They have the supremacy when it comes to this. Well, now the Trump administration's coming in as the federal government and planning to do the deportation. To no surprise, because we saw this at the beginning of the first Trump administration, you've got left-leaning officials who want nothing to do with efforts to remove people from this country, even if they're here illegally, even if they're dangerous to those very communities. And so we've got a couple of examples of that, plus Tom Homan's rebuttal. Tom Homan's going to be Trump's border czar. First of all, we have Katie Hobbs. She's been governor for 2 years. I think this is the first time I've ever heard her voice. She ducked all the debates during the 2022 governor's race with Kari Lake and still managed to win. When you hear this clip, you'll realize why she doesn't speak in public very often and why her Mensa card's probably not showing up anytime soon. But she was asked what she worries about from what they call mass deportations.
What would worry you the most, Governor, about mass deportations?
Well, I think the diversion of law enforcement from the work that they do every day to keep our communities safe. People hiding in fear. We saw that under previous state policies here, and it harms communities. It tears families apart, and that's not gonna happen on my watch.
But then we've got Michelle Wu, the Democratic mayor of Boston, who was asked about this as well.
Look, elections have consequences, and the federal government is responsible for a certain set of actions, and cities, no individual city can reverse or override some parts of that. But what we can do is make sure that we are doing our part to protect our residents in every possible way, that we are not cooperating with those efforts that actually threaten the safety of everyone by causing widespread fear and having large-scale economic impact.
And then you had Tom Homan over on Newsmax responding to what Wu said.
What mayor or governor doesn't want public safety threats out of their communities? I mean, that's our number one responsibility, is to protect our communities. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So she helps us, she gets the hell out of the way, because we're going to do it. And look, there's a clear line here, and they can't cross a clear line. I would suggest she read Title 8, United States Code 1324 III, that says, you can't harbor or conceal an illegal alien in front of law enforcement officers. So I hope she don't cross that line.
Andy, you've got a column out now on foxnews.com detailing this very issue. At the same time, we've seen, especially during the first Trump administration, a lot of local officials not holding on to criminals that they've arrested, not holding them for ICE to take them into custody and get them out of the country. So how's this going to play out?
Well, Tom Homan is correct. The statute he talked about, longstanding federal immigration law, section 1324 III of the immigration laws, does make it a felony starting at 5 years, and it can go up to 20 years depending on the circumstances, to harbor or conceal an illegal alien. It is quite correct that the courts have held that patrolling the border and the status of people under the immigration laws is exclusively the authority of the federal government, as you pointed out a second ago, Greg. And that is to the point that it used to be that as long as a state was carrying out state law that fortified and was consistent with federal immigration law, they were allowed to enforce their statutes. During the Obama years, we famously had the case of Arizona against the United States, in which the Obama administration took the position that states not only have to follow federal statutory law, they have to follow administration policy, executive policy, even if executive policy is not to enforce Congress's laws. So Arizona was not able to do things that were common sense things that actually would have been not only permissible, but bolstering of federal immigration law, because they ran afoul of Obama administration policies. So now, of course, as you say, we have the Trump administration coming in, and they're going to follow the opposite policies, which is to say they're going to enforce the federal law. So the issue here is there are a number of issues. One is there's no speech and debate immunity for state officials and state legislators like there is for the feds, because it's a different constitutional issue when it gets to be federal versus state rather than an interbranch thing at the federal government. And that's a long-winded way of saying it's not a defense for a state official who gets accused of violating federal law, for example, by concealing or harboring illegal immigrants. It's not a defense to say, well, I was carrying out state law or state policy, because under the Supremacy Clause, if the federal government has the right to act in an area, then federal law trumps state law, pardon the pun. So they can't say we obstructed the feds lawfully because we're sanctuary cities or sanctuary states and we were carrying out state policy. They are liable to be prosecuted, these state officials, for harboring or concealing aliens. Now, importantly, and Tom Homan made this point as well, there's a difference between doing nothing and affirmatively obstructing.
Right.
The feds are not allowed to commandeer the states to enforce federal law. And the states do not have a duty to help the feds. They can do nothing as long as they don't obstruct. It's one thing to have a policy that says you don't have to help us, which is weird because we think your communities would prefer if you helped us and got rid of the criminal aliens. But that's a decision. You can make that decision. What you can't do is obstruct us. And Where this becomes an issue, for example, is what you raised before, which is, let's say you got a guy who's an illegal alien and a criminal who's in state custody. What was supposed to happen is the feds file a detainer on that person so that when he finishes his state time, instead of getting released, he gets turned over to the custody of the feds. Now, what these sanctuary states are doing is just releasing people and ignoring the detainer. And their rationale for doing that is the feds aren't paying us any extra money to hold people for, why should we bear the burden of detaining someone that we wouldn't otherwise detain because they want them? So I think that, Congress may have to jump in at a certain point and fix this by saying if there's a detainer, that the states have to hold the person for X number of days until the feds can come and get them. But in the meantime, I think, the feds have to make sure that the states ought to be giving the feds notice that this person's sentence is almost completed so that they can be there and get him in their hot little hands as he gets released, and then they take him into the federal system. But we're going to see a lot of this collision between these sanctuary officials and the Trump administration. And I think that's, frankly, politically, I think it's good for the Trump administration because this is like an 80-20 issue nationally.
No, absolutely. I mean, you put it before the American people, people who shouldn't be in the country at all, and then they're committing crimes, many times violent crimes. I mean, this is a no-brainer. If you want to stand on that hill and die there politically as a resistance hero in a big blue enclave like San Francisco or LA or New York or wherever, it might play there, but it's not going to play nationwide, and Democrats got to be careful about that. But while the Democrats are fretting about what the Trump administration is going to be doing in executing these deportations, they might be consuming some adult beverages. But as they do, they're going to want to take Z-Biotics first, because if you take Z-Biotics before you take drinks, you are going to feel much better than you otherwise would the following morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut, and it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break the byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best the next day. And as I've said, I've got a colleague who had his limits real well understood, but as he got older, those limits didn't work as well. So he tried Z-Biotics. Everything worked great the next day and has ever since. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Andy, on to our third martini. This one's not so much about the law. This is just about pulling our hair out over the fact that we've got some Republicans on Capitol Hill who are a little distracted right now and aren't all that interested in doing their current jobs. And their current jobs are being United States senators. And in particular, a few of them are not showing up for votes, which are very, very close on controversial Biden nominations, including pretty far left judges that Chuck Schumer and Biden are trying to ram through here in the last 2 months of the Biden presidency. So Wall Street Journal has highlighted this. They say Republican senators don't have much to do at the moment from their position in the minority. Their main value in the lame duck session of Congress is to set up the Trump administration by blocking bad legislation and stopping President Biden's judicial nominees when possible. But too many of them aren't even doing that. On Monday, the Senate confirmed Biden nominee Embry Kidd to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals by a vote of 49-45. Pennsylvania Democrat John Fetterman didn't vote, and Joe Manchin of West Virginia voted no. But Mr. Embry will now enjoy a lifetime appointment to the federal bench because Republicans couldn't get their full team on the field. Republicans Mike Braun, Steve Daines, Bill Hagerty, J.D. Vance, and Marco Rubio didn't vote. Couldn't make it. Had conflicts, had more pressing matters, apparently. It's all the same to Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who marked up another success. And so when you look at that list, Andy, you've got Mike Braun, who's the governor-elect in Indiana, so he's dealing with that transition, but it's not that hard to do that from remote. J.D. Vance, the incoming vice president, Marco Rubio, nominated to be Secretary of State, and the Wall Street Journal actually calls him out, saying he's busy prepping for his confirmation hearing in January. Couldn't be bothered to prep here. Couldn't be bothered to take a few minutes off to walk down to the floor and cast a vote that could potentially stop a radical judge. So frustrating to say the least. Well, it's hard enough when you're in the minority, but when a couple of Democrats are doing you some favors there, you might want to take advantage of that before you give these lifetime appointments away.
Boy, is that ever true. I mean, now I just want to say with respect to Daines, I believe I heard that he was actually trying to get back to Washington, but was in some kind of flight delay disaster, which we've all, I mean, it happens to all of us. So I don't want to get too hard on him. But, man, I cannot understand Vance and Rubio for the life of me. These radicals that Biden wants to put on the court, my recollection is one of them's going to the 11th Circuit, which is Rubio's backyard. So we're not just talking about his failure on behalf of conservatives throughout the country, and not just conservatives, but anybody who wants good governance, his failure to use his opportunity to block a radical lefty, just generally speaking. It's bad enough to go AWOL on that, but this is his own backyard. These are the people who elected him are going to have this radical judge for lifetime tenure, making rulings and decisions long after Rubio is gone. And the same thing is true for Vance. One of the judges who's up is a court of appeals that covers Ohio. And then you have Trump come out and say, look, everybody needs to show up and stop these judges. I'm like, did you tell the vice president that? Did you has he gotten that memo? But, there's a tradition of politicians using the job they're in now to get the next highest job that they want to run for. And it's bad for the people that they represent. But, there's a limit to how angry you can get about that, because people vote for these guys knowing that they're ambitious and that they're chasing around after the next thing, and they elect them anyway. I have tolerance for that. Not that I like it, but it's gone on for too long that you can. It's kind of an established practice. What I don't understand is the election is over now. These guys have no job on the planet that's more important than voting when they have votes up, because they speak for their constituents. That's how they do that. That's how American democracy works. We don't all get to vote. We vote for you, and then you're supposed to go protect us. That's their job. They have no election obligation that is a good excuse for failing that. And this idea that, I'm preparing for my hearing for Secretary of State, and I just got elected vice president, and we were vetting potential candidates for the FBI. Greg, if you've ever been on Capitol Hill for an important hearing, and I've been at those hearings, I've testified at a few of them, do you know what happens when there's a vote? Everything stops. No matter what you're doing, no matter how important you think it is. You could be having a hearing on the most important, most controversial issue in the country, but if Congress has to take a vote on an obscure tax matter, everybody stops and they go vote, because that's the main thing they're there for. And J.D. Vance needs to be vetting FBI candidates now for a job his job isn't going to start till January 20th. The FBI director, whoever it's going to be, is going to start after that. And how about vet them in Washington? You're J.D. Vance. You're a senator and the incoming vice president. Have them come to you. I mean, this kind of thing just makes me crazy. That's their job. And they're doing a lot of damage by not stopping these nominees. The Democrats know that at least for the next 2 years, it's going to be Republicans running the Senate, Republicans in the White House, Republicans probably running the House. It's time for them now to make hay while the sun shines, because they're going to be out of power shortly. And they're trying to cram through like 40 nominees between now and whenever, the lame duck ends. These guys got to go to work.
100%. And look, J.D. Vance is going to be vice president, and at some point he's going to have to resign the seat. Mike DeWine's going to make the appointment to fill that vacancy until the next midterm election. So if you can't do the job now, resign now. Let him appoint someone who can do the job on a full-time basis. And Rubio, usually, of course, you like to hang on, make sure you're confirmed before you resign the seat. But given some of the other nominees, I think the Senate's going to be more than likely to approve Marco Rubio by a pretty comfortable margin. Let's just say.
Yeah. The thing that makes me nuts about this, I'm obviously at the end of my string on this, but how many of these guys campaigned, whether for themselves or for Trump or whoever else they campaigned for, on Biden's crazy judges? Mm-hmm. How many of them made that like a major campaign issue that they were out stumping about? And here's the place where they actually get to do something practical to stop it, and they're AWOL.
Guys, get it together, and hopefully at least some of these can be derailed before the end of the lame duck, like Andy said. But Andy, always great to have you with us, and always a fun conversation. I always learn a ton. Have a great Thanksgiving, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Same to you and your family, Greg, and all our listeners. Thanks so much.
You bet. Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He is also a contributing editor at National Review Online, a Fox News contributor, and the author of many wonderful books, including Ball of Collusion. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X. Andy's at Andrew C. McCarthy. Jim is at Jim Geraghty. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a fantastic Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.